Welcome back to The Heat. I'm Nathan King, filling in for Anand Naidu, and we're talking about China's increasing role in UN peacekeeping efforts. Joining me now from Beijing is Dr. Liu Tiewa. She is an associate professor at Beijing Foreign Studies University, and she's written extensively on China and UN peacekeeping operations. Also joining us from Nairobi is Siddharth Chatterjee. He is one of the United Nations resident coordinator and UN Development Programme representative to Kenya. And join us again here in the studio is Wang Guan. He's our chief political correspondent for China's Mandarin service. Welcome to the show, all of you. Let's start with you, Dr. Liu, in Beijing. Can you please tell us why is China now making such a significant contribution to UN peacekeeping, and also the funding as well, the paying for it all?
I think we can understand these questions from three levels. Firstly, with the rising China's economy, Chinese government now attaches greater importance for our image being a responsible great power. So which means that in recent years, we have been thinking about the approaches that we can translate our economic success to the softer power. Put it in another way, how could we attract the people in the world with a commonly accepted value and belief, probably? And that's the first point. Secondly, I think as a belief that China is becoming to be an increasingly important player on the world arena, China still should figure out a way to engage more properly with the international organizations. And as we all know, the United Nations is the most authoritative and universal organization in the world, together with peacekeeping operations and having the great reputation to safeguard the international peace and security. So I think it would be natural for our government to put peacekeeping in the priority of our agenda setting. Thirdly, though China before probably was a bit reluctant, sometimes conservative, about talking about national interests. Now it seems like that we are gradually embrace the concept of protecting and sometimes probably enlarge our national interests. More specifically speaking, participating peacekeeping operations would provide China, I think, the best platform to engage more with our partners and also practice our PLA with the NATO military system in a more practical way. And also at the same time, I think it could protect our national interest, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Siddharth Chatterjee in Nairobi, obviously most UN peacekeeping missions are on the African continent. We're seeing a lot more Chinese peacekeepers. How have you seen Chinese peacekeeping evolve? There seems to be an evolution from the peace building that Wang Guan was talking about earlier, building bridges, engineers, to a much more sort of robust role. And I'm, of course, thinking about South Sudan here.
Nathan, thank you for that question. I think China has demonstrated an agility, a professionalism, and an ability to actually wage a peace. Starting in the early 1990s, when it was small deployments of military observers to about 31,000 peacekeepers in close to 14 UN peacekeeping missions, I think China has become a redoubtable army in terms of providing those services. And these services span engineering, demining, logistics, keeping the peace, medical, training, keeping the sea lane safe, preventing piracy off the coast of Somalia. I think whether it's the Democratic Republic of Congo or South Sudan or off the coast of Somalia, I think on all counts, their services have been meritorious. And I think one of the largest contributors from the permanent five of the Security Council, both in terms of number of troops as well as financial contributions, I think China can play an even bigger role in advancing the peace, because ultimately that is the aim of the entire United Nations Charter, is to build bridges of peace, and I think China is well positioned to do that.
Wang Guan here in the studio. I used to cover the UN for about 10 years, and I used to know how difficult it was to get UN peacekeeping missions up and running. The Secretary General and the head of peacekeeping used to have to beg for equipment and soldiers. And as some nations back off peacekeeping and its risks, we've seen China step up. Why do you think that is? What is happening in the national moment for China that makes this so important?
Right, Nathan. 10 years ago, China's contribution of troops to the United Nations peacekeeping missions was only 1/10 of that today. The pace really started picking up during the end of the former President Hu Jintao's presidency. As China increases its presence in Africa and its engagement in the Middle East, China started sending more troops to the United Nations. But later, it's really things accelerated when President Xi Jinping took office in 2013. And during a milestone foreign affairs work group meeting in 2013, he signaled an end to, or a break to China's Tao Guang Yang Hui foreign policy, which means lay low and bide your time. And he proposed a 奋发有为 foreign policy that is proactively engage the world community and get things done. Under that doctrine, if you will, China really started contributing more troops. In fact, I had the pleasure of going on a patrolling mission with the Chinese Navy back in 2011.
Yes, I remember. Very good stories,
in southern Pacific, when they just finished the patrolling mission off the Gulf of Aden, off the coast of Somalia. Those were tough times. 19, 20-year-old boys being in the ocean for 3 months, not eating well, deprivation of sleep. They're doing what they've got to do. And, that's why people say once a Navy, always a Navy.
I saw some of those Gulf of Aden people in Rimpak as well. Very interesting stories. Can I go to you, Dr. Liu, again? President Xi Jinping last year at the United Nations General Assembly gave a lot of commitments for peacekeeping, including this contribution of 8,000 peacekeepers ready to go at a moment's notice. This is all part of the evolution of UN peacekeeping, isn't it? It's been very difficult to deploy missions. How is China part of this change in peacekeeping, if you like?
If we have to evaluate, China's role in just orienting the change, I think, China could contribute from several levels. Firstly, I think because, as we all know that after Xi's address in the United Nations, China will both increase the personnel dispatch as well as the financial assistance, or just add the budget of the UN peacekeeping operations. And also, I think more importantly, I think China should try to integrate some kind of Chinese characteristics into those kind of UN peacekeeping framework. For example, I think it would be valuable that China could share its experiences. And we have learned from developing our own economy, because our senior officials have been repeatedly emphasized that we need to address the rooting cause for the instabilities happened in those conflict-affected countries. So, and also China has been insisting on providing some financial assistance, economic aid for those underdeveloped countries. At the same time, probably provide some assistance for the infrastructure construction, as well as some other kind of medical support, education support, all of which, could be, I think, a whole package, or kind of a, like a future direction for UN peacekeepings. Before it's traditional peacekeeping, robust peacekeeping. Probably in the future, we can integrate peacekeeping a bit with the economic development. So that's peace and development emphasized a lot of times by our government.
Thank you. Siddharth Chatterjee in Nairobi, it's fair to say that UN peacekeeping has had a few scandals. And the image of UN peacekeeping has been tarnished in the African continent and beyond. Although when I've been reading about Chinese peacekeepers, one incident comes to light in July 10th when there was a pitched battle between rebel and government forces in South Sudan. There seemed to be a height of professionalism there that allowed many more civilians to make it to safety to the UNMISS camp, even though some, of course, were abused by both sides. Is that what you've seen on the ground?
Well, all I can say is that the Chinese peacekeepers, like many other countries, have demonstrated admirable discipline in the face of adversity. I mean, 21 Chinese peacekeepers have laid down their lives in different peacekeeping missions. However, yes, there is no doubt that we've had episodes where certain soldiers from different peacekeeping nations have maligned the image of the United Nations peacekeeping. I think China has come through over here and stands tall in terms of the discipline, in terms of the value systems it's projected, and in terms of the work it's done. So on that count, I would say that's the model of peacekeeping that we need to go on. But I'll just go back for a moment on what the professor in Beijing said, and I think I completely agree with that. I think peacekeeping needs to be integrated with a form of socio-economic development as well. And this is where a partnership should be forged around the peacekeepers, the civil society organizations, etc. Because ultimately you may have the peace. For example, South Sudan is a good example of that, there was a peace agreement, all that happened, and 2013, everything went belly up. I think the process of permeating the peace at the grassroots between the tribes, looking at issues of reconciliation, did not adequately get addressed. And I think the mandate of peacekeeping now needs to become much more multifaceted, from economic development to reconciliation to keeping the peace to advancing human development, because ultimately a lot of these conflicts, you would agree, are really based on a competition for resources. It's about water, it's about pastures, and then, politics and everything comes into play. But I would just conclude by saying that the primacy of politics is crucial in this.
Yeah, so basically combining the peacekeeping and peace-building operations much more tightly in an integrated plan. That's very interesting. There is a lot of talk about a more rapid deployment, a lot more focus on peacemaking, as you know. Wang Guan, how much of a sense is UN peacekeeping and China's contribution a sense of national pride at the moment? I mean, I remember when several have been killed in the last year or so, and there was a deep sense of honour of the commitment there.
Right. My colleagues in Beijing and in Nairobi perfectly put it, in that it requires discipline, it requires sacrifice, and Chinese troops, just like troops in many other countries, did just that. And it's not just the moments of sadness that became the hallmark of Chinese peacekeeping missions, but also times of joy when the Chinese troops evacuated tens of thousands of Chinese nationals, as well as nationals from dozens of different countries in Yemen.
That's right.
Barely last year. And also when the Chinese troops patrolled the Gulf of Aden and engaged with the Somalian pirates and protected the sea lanes and make sure trade, sea lanes for trade were open. Those were the moments of fulfillment and joy. People talk about it back home. Certainly, it is a matter of national pride, but it is also a matter of fulfilling China's commitment as a major stakeholder globally.
Dr. Liu, last word from you. As you have an expert on peacekeeping. What do you think is the proudest moment for China when it comes to peacekeeping operations around the world?
The proud of China. I think firstly, I would like to say, peacekeeping operations for China in the past several decades to a great extent highlighted our national image, on the world stage, safeguarding international peace and security. Just now our experts mentioned some misconducts in the peacekeeping operations. For example, the corruptions and also sexual exploitation and abuse, those kind of deeds. But for China, we have provided an almost a perfect record for UN peacekeeping operations, because we have just selected with a really cautious training program, and we provide the well-trained staff, peacekeepers and civilian police with professional skills and also, integrity. I think that's very important for such a kind of international enterprise. So that's the first point I would like to mention, and I think it has already won China a lot of applauses in the world. Secondly, as I mentioned, because I personally concentrated a lot on, the social development, economic development in the conflict-affected countries. I think in the whole process of Chinese involvement in the peacekeeping operations, we actually provided substantial and enormous help to those countries. I would like to say probably in an economic way. For example, in the early stage for China to participate in peacekeeping operations, we, as I mentioned before, we built a lot of bridges and roads and hospitals, schools, which just will, I think, benefit a lot for the local people to just enhance their fundamental living standards. And I think it also contribute to their sustainable development or just eradicate the poverty, probably as the rooting cause of those conflicts.
A role that is going to grow and grow. Thank you so much, Dr. Liu, and everyone on our panel. Well, that's it.